Hello and welcome to this presentation on John Conway's Game of Life. The Game of Life is a cellular automation invented by a Cambridge mathematician, John Conway. This game consists of a collection of cells based on a few mathematical rules. The cells can live, the cells can die, or multiply. Depending on the initial conditions, the cells form various patterns throughout the course of the game. Now, let's have a look at the rules of the game. This game consists of 4 rules that determine if a cell lives or dies. All depends on how many of that cell's neighbors are alive. The first rule on birth. Now, on the birth of a cell, each dead cell adjacent to exactly 3 live neighbors will become live in the next generation. For example, let's use the grid here. Using yellow post-it to present a live cell, a no post-it to present a dead cell, and a blue post-it to underline a newborn cell, which then just becomes a normal cell in yellow. For example, if we have cells in this configuration, the rule states that each dead cell adjacent to 3 live neighbors will become live in the next generation. Now, in this case, the neighbors mean left, right, to the top, to the bottom, and diagonal. And in this configuration, we only have one dead neighbor that is adjacent to 3 live neighbors, and that is here. So we have one newborn, which then becomes live in the next generation. The next rule on death by isolation states that each live cell with one or fewer live neighbors will die in the next generation. Now let's look at the cell neighboring one live cell with the remaining neighbors dead. Applying the rules, this cell dies because it is isolated. Because there are only 2 cells alive in the board with only one live neighbor, and there are no dead cells that could possibly have 3 live neighbors, there will be no births, even with a single cell on board with 0 live neighbors. So all starting configurations with only a single cell will only contain dead cells in the next generation because of isolation. Let's look at the third rule, death by overcrowding. This rule states that each live cell with 4 or more live neighbors will die in the next generation as if by overcrowding. For example, this. Applying the rules, a new cell is born here because it has exactly 3 live neighbors, while this cell dies because it has 4 live neighbors. Same to this cell here because it has 4 live neighbors, and another new cell is born here because it has 3 live neighbors. Following the rules, this cell dies because of isolation. It had only one neighbor that is alive. Same to this cell here. In the next generation, a new cell is born here because it has exactly 3 live neighbors, while this cell dies because of isolation. The same to this. And our new configuration, this. In this particular configuration, continuing with the rules, we know that they all die in the next generation. Why? Because in this case, each cell will only have a maximum of 1 live neighbor. There will be no births since there are fewer than 3 live cells. So all the initial configurations will die in the first in this last generation. And here is the 4th rule, survival. This rule states that each live cell with either 2 or 3 live neighbors will remain alive for the next generation. For example, this configuration. In this configuration, each cell has 3 live neighbors. Cell 1 here has cell 2, 3, and 4 as the neighbors. Cell 2 here has cell 1, 3, and 4 as the neighbors. Same to cell 4 with cell 3, 1, and 2, and same to cell 3. And most importantly, all these rules apply to all the cells at the same time. So we have births as if by reproduction, death by isolation as if by underpopulation, death by overcrowding as if by overpopulation, and survival. Now, let's see what these simple rules. Let's have a look at these simple rules. Given a configuration like this, what do you think is going to happen to these cells? These cells can either be alive with tokens in it or dead with no tokens. In computer versions, live cells are represented by one color and dead cells by another, or just a blank grid. In theory, the size of the cell or the grid is infinite, but small boards will do for the initial play. This is a solitary game, or one with just one player, and the play of the typical game looks like this. You can pause the video and try out this configuration by yourself. Let's apply the rules. Things start to get more interesting here. Starting with the initial setup here, then we move on to the next generation and we apply the rules. Most configurations of 3 are far enough apart that they die out in 1 or 2 generations. But this is an exception. Starting with a line of 3 live cells, the 2 end cells will die because they had 1 neighbor each, while the middle cell will survive because it had 2 live neighbors. There will be 2 bats. And the new configuration in the next generation will be this. The bats occur in the 2 cells next to the surviving cell that were dead because each those positions is next to the 3 live starting positions. This pattern will repeat in every second generation with the 2 end cells dying and new cells are born from a horizontal line to a vertical line of 3. The pattern is called a blinker. While this one, as we had looked before, it becomes stable. Pause the video and try out yourself. Applying the rules, the 2 live cells here die because of isolation and will remain with 1 live cell in the next generation. The remaining live cell die because of isolation because the cells were further in the initial configuration. While with this pattern, a new cell is born here because it has exactly 2 live neighbors, while this cell will die together with this because of isolation, giving us the arrangement in the next generation. While this also reduces to nothing, all the cells die because of isolation. Now, how about a configuration like this called a glider? Now stop the video here and try applying the rules. You can also try the first steps of the glider here, pausing the video. Applying the rules, a new cell is born here and here, while this cell dies of isolation and this one here, giving this as the next generation. In the following generation, a new cell is born here and here, while this cell dies because of overcrowding and this one dies because of isolation, resulting to this as the new configuration. In the following generation, a new cell is born here, while this cell dies because of overcrowding, same to this one because of overcrowding. Sorry, the first one here dies because of isolation. A new cell is born here, while this one dies because of isolation. And this is the resulting configuration of the next generation. Now let's have a look at this cell in a computer version. Type in this URL at your computer. Then play full screen. Use the control run to show what exists on the screen and set step to show step by step. You can also use clear to clear the previous. Here, the blue color will represent a live cell, while a green color will represent the trace of the dead cells. Now these are the steps of a glider. from this to this to this to this to this, with the pattern repeating itself back and forth, the same pattern repeating itself. Now we can run to show how it glides on the screen. Now that is how interesting these rules apply. Have a look at the pattern. Thanks for watching. Try for yourself. Have fun.